5 of the book of Daniel. Ready to talk about it or ask questions today. Questions that I may or may not be able to answer. First of all, let's take the time for prayer. Our Father which art in heaven, we give you thanks this morning for a bright, sunshiny day that certainly brightens our spirits and encourage us to know that spring is on its way, and we give you thanks and praise for that. We ask now that you will be with each one of us as we talk about and digest the things that are in chapter 5 here, what you gave to Daniel many years ago. We thank you for your word and what it tells us. We give you thanks and praise and honor and glory in everything. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Chapter 5. Nebuchadnezzar died on October the 7th, 562 BC, and Nabonidus became king in 556 BC, and he was king during chapter 5 here. So now that presents us with a problem. In verse 1, two problems exist. First of all, who was this Belshazzar? In the Bible it says he was king. Historians never did find that record that Belshazzar was king. That is, until 1920. In 1920 they found more records. They discovered new documents and discovered that Belshazzar was the son of Nabonidus. So, Nabonidus was king, and so why does verse 1 say that Belshazzar was king? Is the book of Daniel really true?
Could it be the grandson?
The grandson, yes. And what happened here was Nabonidus was a son of Nebuchadnezzar, and there was some uprising or some rebellious people in the west, and so he took an army and marched west, put the rebellion down, and he liked that place very well. And so he built a palace there, and he settled down. So then we have Nabonidus, the king in the west, and in the east we have Belshazzar, his son, to rule over the area of Babylon. So really we have two kings.
What area was? Where did he set up his other the western throne?
In Arabia, or what is Arabia now, is where he was king. He liked the place and he built a palace and he decided to stay there. So now we have two kings, Belshazzar in the east over the city and the province of Babylon, and Nabonidus was in the west in what we would call Arabia. So Daniel was correct in saying that Belshazzar was king. When Belshazzar was about 14 years of age, that's when his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar died. And he should have remembered about the statue and all of these stories that we have read about so far. He should have known all about them. He should have known about God's dealings with Nebuchadnezzar. He should have remembered that Daniel was telling Nebuchadnezzar about the kingdom and that it would fall to Media Persia, and that Babylon, the city, would fall to Medo Persia. Wow. Well, what happened? King Cyrus of Medo Persia surrounded the city of Babylon. The city was surrounded for 4 months before this banquet that we're talking about today. And so you can see the city surrounded, but it didn't make a whole lot of difference. Okay? Nebuchadnezzar had already made a wall so thick that no battering ram, that's what they used, a big battering ram, you've seen the pictures and all, but this wall that Nebuchadnezzar built around the city was so thick that no battering ram could ever penetrate it. And besides that, this big thick wall that they couldn't break through, there was another wall inside the big wall. So there was lots of defense there that nobody could break through and get into the city. No battering ram could ever penetrate it. Then the inner wall. How long could people inside these walls, how long could the people in that city hold out? That was the question. Well, they had enough food stored in that city to last them for, get this, 20 years. That's a long time. That's a lot of food. I don't know how they stored it or kept it or whatever. I see on the TV today where you can buy food that would last for, 25 years? Yeah. But back in those days, 20 years they had enough of food to last. Can you imagine that? And besides the food, the river, the Euphrates River, was flowing right through the city. So they had food for 20 years and an unlimited supply of water. So they were saying, come and get us if you can, but you cannot penetrate, you can't get in this city. So King Belshazzar was, well, he felt very secure in all of this. So they're having this banquet, and he had invited 1,000 of his officials from throughout the kingdom to come to this party. Now, it's been told that perhaps the reason they had 1,000 officials there was because of the Medo-Persians that had come and surrounded the city, and these officials came to the city looking for security so that they would be safe, because the Medo-Persians were going hog wild. So anyhow, they were having this big banquet. It was customary in that time to have the king or whatever raised up on a platform. So if you can imagine this huge banquet hall and then a platform, and that's where the king would sit up on that platform. Well, they were going on and kind of getting drunk, and well, maybe they were drunk, I don't know. But the king Belshazzar, he decided, well, now I am really secure here. They said that they're gonna destroy Babylon. It will fall in one day. And the king thought, well, that can't be. We've got this city surrounded. It's impossible for any army to come in and take over. So, to take things further, Nebuchadnezzar, you remember, when he took the captives from Jerusalem over to Babylon, he took with him some of the gold vessels from the temple in Jerusalem, and he had them there in the temple of his gods, Marduk, there in Babylon. So Belshazzar was, how shall we say it? He was challenging the God of Israel, the Most High God. He was like shaking his fist at God. Ha ha ha! You think Medo-Persian can take over in one day? They can't even get in the city. So he was saying that you said that Babylon will fall. We got the city surrounded. I'm declaring to you that Babylon will not fall. My defenses are impregnable. No one can take it. And here we go. Once again, a pagan king was providing God with a splendid opportunity to demonstrate his sovereignty. With the handwriting on the wall. And you've read the story in chapter 5. Let me read verses 5 to 9. This is all I'm going to read for today because you already read it. In the same hour, the fingers of a man's hand appeared and wrote opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, and the king saw the part of the hand that wrote it. Then the king's countenance changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his hips were loosened, and his knees knocked against each other. The king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. And the king spoke, saying to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and tells me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck, and he shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Now all the king's wise men came, but they could not read the writing or make known to the king its interpretation. Then King Belshazzar was greatly troubled. His countenance was changed, and his lords were astonished. Wow, can you imagine that? So, during the course of this drunken party that challenged God, the fingers of an unattached hand suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Boy, if you were in that banquet hall that day and you were the king, boy, your knees would be knocking too, wouldn't they? Okay. The mysterious hand wrote something on the wall of the banquet hall. When Belshazzar saw this, he became very sober in a hurry, I would imagine. He became pale-faced, it says. He was painfully disturbed, it says. Wow. His hip joints got loose, and his knees began to knock. This guy was really scared, you know. He knew and he heard of all of these prophecies, but he had not counted on the handwriting on the wall. This was a big change for Belshazzar, who was defying God. Boy, that's something. Defying God Almighty. Well, what did the king do? He screamed for the wise men. Bring in all of the wise men and the soothsayers and all of those guys that are supposed to know everything. Bring them in. And when they got there, he promised them great rewards if they could interpret or if they could read it and then interpret the handwriting on the wall. He promised that he would give the person who could do this, he would give them purple clothing. Why purple clothing? That's what royalty wore. Yeah. Well, not only purple clothing, but a gold chain. Now, a gold chain, only people would wear a gold chain if it was given to them by the king. Other than that, no gold chain. I guess they confiscated all the gold to put on the everything that was gold plated there. Third, he would make them third in the kingdom. What would that make them? Well, now, if Nabonidus was king, and then Belshazzar was king, and the third person would be the guy who could interpret the writing on the wall. Boy, that's pretty far up, you know. Okay. Nobody could do it. They called in all these guys, and they could not, and they couldn't even read it, let alone understand it and interpret what it meant. So what happens now? In comes the who?
Queen.
The Queen Mother. Yeah. We are led to believe that the Queen was the widow of King Nebuchadnezzar, and it was customary for a new king like Belshazzar or Nabonidus. It was customary for them to marry the widow of a former king in order, well, it made them more legitimate, you know. And that's what they're always looking for, to make them more legitimate so somebody else doesn't think that they should be sitting in the king's chair. So, anyhow, the Queen Mother comes in, and she apparently wasn't too far away because she heard the confusion and all the ruckus that was going on in the banquet hall, and she came in and told the king about Daniel. Yeah. And, she said to the king, well, now, I know a guy, he used to be an important fellow in your kingdom, but now he's not. But he, in days gone by, he could interpret dreams. He could make prophecies that always came true. And so I think, she said, I think you ought to call this guy, his name is Daniel, by the way, king. I think you ought to call him and see what he has to say about the writing on the wall. Because if anybody can, I think he can. I've seen him do it. So Belshazzar called Daniel into the banquet hall and said that he heard Daniel and about all his abilities, And so the king promised Daniel these same 3 rewards that he had promised his wise men, and they couldn't do it, and said, if you can interpret this writing, then I will give you the same 3 rewards that I promised my other wise men. Belshazzar kind of rehearsed before Daniel all of the things that he heard or that he knew about from his early, even childhood days. He rehearsed this before Daniel, and he promised the same 3 rewards. And Daniel said, okay, king, that sounds good to me. No, he didn't. He said, no, thank you, king. I'm more than willing to interpret the writing on the wall, but for the rewards, forget it. I'm not doing this for any higher position or thing that you might be able to give me. Any personal gain for myself, I'm not here for that. But before doing what the king wanted him to do, to interpret the handwriting on the wall, Daniel gave Belshazzar a history lesson. He reminded Belshazzar, who was the king, how the God of Israel had made Nebuchadnezzar a great king and then took it away from him. Because of, he took the kingdom away from Nebuchadnezzar because of his great pride, not giving any glory to God at all. But, last week we saw him walking around on the hanging gardens of Babylon and boasting how he had made Babylon so great. It was him that made it all, not God. And that's when God said, this is enough. But Daniel was reminding the king Belshazzar of all of this and told him that it was the pride that brought Nebuchadnezzar down. Okay. And he would not recognize that the God of Israel was really the most high God above all of the gods there in Babylon. Marduk was their chief god, but they had dozens of other gods, gods of the weather and of the growing season, the ground, everything they had a god for. And Nebuchadnezzar would not recognize that. And Daniel was telling Belshazzar now that you're as bad as Nebuchadnezzar. You haven't learned a thing from all of his experiences, and it's right in your family, you should have known. But the Most High God is above all other gods that you have in your temples here in Babylon. Now, it seems like Belshazzar knew about these things that Daniel was telling him. He grew up around the palace. He was 14 years old when Nebuchadnezzar died, so he knew what was going on. He knew what happened to his grandfather, and he hadn't yet, in his own mind, decided that the God of Israel, the Most High God, was super above all of the gods of Babylon, every god that they had. He had not learned humility from it. Instead, through his desecration of the vessels of the Most High God, he had exalted himself above this God of Israel, above the Most High God. Belshazzar should have glorified God rather than himself. Okay? This Most High God really controlled the very life, the very breath of Belshazzar and all of the people of Babylon, as far as that goes. He controlled their very breath. Because of Belshazzar's arrogant attitude, God sent the mysterious hand to write the message. You see, in the previous chapters, God audibly, he spoke the word. This time, he decided, well, you guys didn't learn by just talking to you. So he wrote them a letter. He wrote it in handwriting on the wall. God sent the mysterious hand to write his message. So Daniel comes to the banquet hall and is reading and interpreting the writing. In compliance with the king's request, Daniel did this. He read and he interpreted the writing, and to say the least, the interpretation that Daniel gave was not very encouraging for the king or his subjects. Boy. The word meaning, as you read and didn't understand, neither did I, but upon some research I find that the word meaning meant numbered or reckoned. Okay? It indicated that God had numbered the days of Belshazzar's kingdom and had reckoned that those days had come to an end. This meaning, it was written on the wall twice, okay, to emphasize the certain end of Belshazzar's kingdom. Wow. The word tekel signified that God had weighed Belshazzar in the balance and found him deficient in moral activity. Since the king did not measure up to God's standard, he was not fit to continue ruling. That was the message. Boy. And the word Perez at the end meant broken or divided, and implied that God had determined to splatter Belshazzar's kingdom and give it to the Medo-Persians. This was so certain to happen that Daniel spoke of it as if it had already happened. Not was going to happen, but had already accomplished that. Now, as Belshazzar had shown contempt to God earlier, this prophecy concerning the fall of Babylon, or the whole Babylonian kingdom altogether, we now believe that this most recent prophecy that was the message for the king, perhaps this change of attitude on the part of the king, because you remember reading here that as soon as the king heard the prophecy that Daniel spoke, he changed right away. He sobered up and and got pale-faced, and knees began knocking. He was scared to death. Scared to death is pretty much literal in this case, but he didn't know it was going to go that far at the time. The Babylonians believed that decrees of the gods existed in written form, and so here was a written form for the king. So now Daniel accepted the rewards that were offered to him, for he knew that the king properly understood his motives in reading and interpreting the writing. So the king understood now, but well, it's too late. Medo-Persia was ready, but put yourself in the position of this king. Here is this guy Daniel coming in, and he tells me that the kingdom is going to end in one day. Well, that doesn't happen in one day. The armies have to get out there and battle it out for days or weeks or months. And here Daniel gives a prophecy where the defenses of Babylon are nothing. Boy. And then the king begins to think, the defenses are nothing. Look at the defenses that we have here. Man, nobody could penetrate them. But these Medo-Persian troops were just outside the gate of the city. The sovereignty of God was now on the line. The pagan Babylonians would find out whether it was their gods or the Most High God that ruled in the affairs of men. Could Daniel's God cause the fulfillment of his prophecies? Could his God overcome all of these big walls? Everything. They were impregnable. Well, go outside the gates now. King Cyrus of Persia, he knew that the defenses of Babylon would not permit him to get into the city. He knew he couldn't penetrate the walls. He knew that they had provisions in there that they could hold out against them for a long, long time. His troops could not get into the city through the conventional way, which they used in those days. They would get these huge battering rams and pound the walls until they fell down, and then they would have access to the city. It was obvious that if Babylon were to be taken, there would have to be some kind of a unique strategy that would get them in, because they couldn't do it the ordinary wall. According to more than one ancient historian, the Medo-Persians did devise a unique strategy. And you've read about that. The key to the strategy was the position of the Euphrates River that flowed through the city and was their lifeline, but it was the key to the entrance of the Medo-Persians. On the very night that the Babylonians were reveling at Belshazzar's feet, the same day, Medo-Persians diverged the water of the Euphrates River from its normal channel under the city's walls. They diverted it, and so once the water was shallow enough for the troops to get in, Medo-Persian soldiers entered the river, under the wall, and into the city. Wow. The Babylonians were caught by surprise. Before many of them knew what was happening, the city had fallen to the Medo-Persians without a major battle or destruction. Some of the Medo-Persian commanders led soldiers directly to the royal palace where the humongous party was going on. They went there to get Belshazzar. As they attacked the Babylonian guards outside the palace gates, a great deal of noise happened, and out of curiosity, Belshazzar ordered some of the men inside the palace to investigate the noise, and so they opened the gates to find out what was going on, what was the source of the uproar of some of the Medo-Persian soldiers. They rushed through the gates and into the palace and straight to the king, Belshazzar, who was up there on his platform. It wasn't hard to find him. He was up on the platform with probably his sword drawn, but it was to no avail. They headed directly for the banquet hall, and upon entering they found Belshazzar standing with his sword drawn. They killed the king and many of his officials, all in the same day as the drunken party and the handwriting on the wall. Belshazzar was slain, and the great city of Babylon fell on the night of October 13th, 539 BC. It was I wonder if it was Friday, the 13th. Once again, as in all of the previous chapters, once again God demonstrated his sovereignty in spite of Babylon's great defenses. It fell in one day's time, just exactly as God had foretold that it would happen. And we could turn to Isaiah chapter 47 and verse 9 and see how Isaiah said that too. Anyhow, the nations of the world should learn a lesson from this event. No matter how extensive or sophisticated the defenses, no nation will be able to stand when God says that it is time for it to fall. The Most High God rules in the affairs of men and of nations. Daniel indicated that Darius the Mede ruled the kingdom of Babylon after it fell to Medo-Persia. And that statement has a positive problem. Who was Darius the king? Ancient documents did not record a man with that name ruling over Babylon immediately after the conquest by Medo-Persia. Well, two observations should be made concerning this problem. First, the name Darius probably was the title of honor rather than a personal name. How many of you know who Josephus, the historian, was? Okay. He wrote and he claimed that Darius had another name. The ancient Greek historian Herodias and modern authorities on the old Persian language claimed that Darius was a title rather than a proper name. Darius means holder of the scepter. Well, King Cyrus was appointed to be governor of Babylon. Now here comes another fella, Gubaro. He was born in 601 BC and indicated that he would have been about the age of 62 when Babylon fell in 539 BC. The area over which Cyrus appointed him governor was basically the same as that which comprised the former kingdom of Babylon, including the city of Babylon. King Cyrus then divided his enormous empire into 20 provinces and then appointed a governor over each province. In light of this, Daniel was not stretching the truth when he referred to Darius as king over the kingdom of the Chaldeans, since Darius had been appointed by King Cyrus. Daniel was accurate when he wrote that Darius received the kingdom and was made king. And that's the story of the handwriting on the wall. What are your comments or questions?
I thought it was interesting that the queen was the one that told him about Daniel. I mean, we see that that's not the first time in the Old Testament where a queen or a lady, a woman, told the king what to do.
What queen was even more important than this one, perhaps, you're thinking of?
Esther.
Queen Esther, yeah. And that's a neat story, too.
Who was the king?
Who was the king?
Yes.
When?
When Esther was queen. Is that Darius?
I'm not sure. I'll have to find out.
What is the...
Barb is looking that up, going to find it for us.
I guess my next question would be how many years or...
What's the difference between Queen Esther and this Queen Mother?
No, I'm... With Queen Esther, I mean, if Darius was king, was he the same king that took over right away after the Babylonians fell?
It was King Xerxes.
King, yeah, you're right, King Xerxes.
I have at home a chart, well, it's a whole book of charts and things, that places all of these kings, and you can look at the chart and see how far apart they are and over what, and I'll go home and look at the chart a while and see what I can figure out.
When King Belshazzar had the goblets and the vessels from the temple brought in, was he prompted by the devil to do that, or was he prompted by God to do that?
I think he was pretty close to being the devil.
No, I mean, he was...
Well, God didn't tell him to do that, I can tell you that.
You know, when you look at all the events that happened, you have the Medes and the Persians were diverting the river. The gates, according to Isaiah, the gates were left open that night. And, I mean, if you're fearful that the kingdom, you know, you would at least have the common sense to close the gates. But here the gates were left open. And then Galerius, ordered the vessels, the goblets and stuff from the temple to be brought in. It's almost like it was...
Open house.
Everything was not coincidental, but it was almost like the hand of God might have been...
Well, according to what we read here in the 5th chapter, the gates to the palace inside the city walls were closed. And nobody got in there unless the king said okay. Well, when the Medo-Persians came in, they went straight to the palace, but the gates were closed. And so when the king heard about all the commotion outside the walls, he opened the gates to send some soldiers out to see what was going on. And when they opened the gates, the soldiers came in, and that was the end of Belshazzar.
I guess I know they had this massive wall around the city of Babylon, but then I heard that they had a wall built on each side of the river, you know, throughout the whole city, and in those walls they had certain gates. So even if they could get into the river, they couldn't get into the actual city itself because the gates were closed. But that particular night, the gates were left open.
Well, once they got into the city under the river, they didn't need any gates to get into the city. They went to the palace, and that's where the gates were closed. But once they got into the palace, there we are. Okay. This is the city of Babylon. Here's the river coming into the city. Thank you. The river coming through the city. Well, let's see. One of these places tells us where the palace is. So once they got into the city under the river, they were already in the city. So they needed to get to the king's palace, which had another wall around it. And so when they got through the second, not the second wall, but the second line of defense, the wall that kept them out of the king's palace, when they got through that wall, then they got to the king. Now, this whole thing here was the city of Babylon as we knew it back in those days. Now this part here, just here, this is where the wall around the city was built, not clear out here. Okay, how many don't understand it?
I'm having trouble figuring out how the Medo-Persians were able to bypass that river. That's a major river.
Yeah, but
And they must have had some heavy equipment.
well,
Shovels.
yeah, they diverted it out here somewhere, not in the middle of the city.
Do you know
But,
where?
obviously, I think that they didn't divert that river all in one day. They had surrounded the city for 4 months, and during that time they were working on diverting the river, but the people inside the city were so enclosed that they didn't figure out what the Medo-Persians were doing out there. And so on that day, they had gone far enough that they could divert the river somewhere else for a long, or for even a short period of time, long enough for their soldiers to get in under the wall and into the city.
So it wasn't just a damming up of the river above the wall.
No, I think
To allow
they
them to go
diverted
to
the
wall.
river. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
that's a major project.
It is.
You had to need CDs probably.
If you had an army of soldiers out there, you could do it, though. They did it.
Well, the people inside were so confident that that wall and 20 years of food,
They were secure.
Yeah, and I think that there might be a chink in that sometime.
Well, you wouldn't need to bring the whole army in under the wall. Once a few got through, they could open the gates.
Yes, yes. And that's, what happened is Belshazzar heard all the commotion that was going on out there. He sent soldiers out to see what was going on. They opened the gates, and then the Medo-Persians came in.
But of course, God was probably working through the Medo-Persians to collapse that.
Obviously, he was working through all of them here in this story to bring about his will and his way, and to prove that he was the most high God above any and all other gods.
At this time, his father was already conquered by the Medes and Persians.
His father,
Belshazzar's father had his kingdom in Arabia.
oh yeah, he was away. He was not in Babylon.
That already had fallen. That fell before Babylon fell, correct?
I don't know which came first,
Okay.
but eventually, within a short period of time, well, once Babylon fell, the rest of the kingdom would go down quickly.